Hello, my darling listeners. This is Facts 5. I'm bringing the facts. Last week, I read a Washington Post article about my state of Maryland and how it had some pretty strong laws to protect cops. This week, I'm reading an article that follows up on it, specifically one about how said law was repealed. This was repealed last year officially, but some effects of the law don't kick in until July of this year, 2022. I'm curious to see how this turns out. Sorry for the relatively brief intro and conclusion. I'm currently working on something else, something rather big for this channel, and that's taking up a lot of time. Hopefully, it'll be worth it when I'm done. Maryland enacts landmark police overhaul. First state to repeal Police Bill of Rights by Ovetta Wiggins and Erin Cox, published in the Washington Post on April 10, 2021. Maryland enacted historic police accountability measures Saturday, becoming the first state to repeal its powerful Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, and setting new rules for when police may use force and how they are investigated and disciplined. The Democratic majority legislature dealt Republican Governor Larry Hogan a sharp rebuke, overriding his vetoes of measures that raise the bar for officers to use force, give civilians a role to play in police discipline for the first time, restrict no-knock warrants, mandate body cameras, and open some allegations of police wrongdoing for public review. Each bill had been hailed by criminal justice advocates as having the potential to make policing in the state fairer and more transparent. Democrats, who hold large majorities in the legislature, made enacting them a top priority after months of protests over the police-involved deaths of unarmed black men and women.
Maryland is leading the nation in transforming our broken policing system,
said Speaker Adrienne A. Jones, Democrat, Baltimore County, who sponsored the repeal of the Officers' Bill of Rights and is the first black person to hold her leadership role.
I am proud to lead the House in overriding the governor's veto and showing the nation exactly where we stand as a state.
The changes do not go as far as some social justice advocates had hoped. Discipline will now largely be decided by civilian panels, for example, but police chiefs maintain a role. Some activists wanted the panels to act independently of the police. Still, the legislation imposes one of the strictest police use of force standards in the nation, according to experts, requires officers to prioritize de-escalation tactics, and imposes a criminal penalty for those found to have used excessive force. During months of debate, many white Republican lawmakers talked about the dangers police officers face on the job and said the bills would remove needed protection. Black Democratic lawmakers responded with passionate and personal arguments for why police officers need better training and said they hoped the legislation would change policing culture and attitudes towards black people.
I want to make it out alive too,
said Del C.T. Wilson, Democrat from Charles, a former prosecutor who said his size and skin color have often aroused suspicion from police.
When I look in that officer's eyes, they're looking not at me like I'm another human being,
Wilson said.
At best, I'm a threat. At worst, I'm an animal. That is unacceptable.
Senate President Bill Ferguson, a Democrat from Baltimore City, who is white, said the raft of bills enacted Saturday
starts the work. What we are doing today is taking a step forward to creating greater public safety where every single member of our community feels safe,
Ferguson said.
We are not there, but with this framework, we can get there.
Hogan, who is weighing a presidential bid for 2024, has built a varied record on criminal justice issues, championing drug treatment rather than jail time for non-violent offenses, but aggressively seeking tougher penalties for violent crimes. He has refused to free many prisoners approved for release by the state's parole board and has consistently sided with police unions in matters regarding officer protections and accountability. In his veto letter Friday night, Hogan wrote that the three policing bills would
erode police morale, community relationships, and public confidence. This will result in great damage to police recruitment and retention, posing significant risks to public safety throughout our state,
the letter said. Also on Saturday, the General Assembly overturned an earlier Hogan veto of a bill that would abolish life sentences without parole for juveniles. The legislation allows prisoners who were juveniles when they were convicted to appeal to a judge for release after they have served 20 years. In addition, the legislature overrode Hogan's veto of a prevailing wage law, which expands the circumstances under which construction workers on state projects must be paid the same wage as those on nearby private sector sites. Hogan said the parole measure would upend the state's parole process, cause additional trauma to victims' families, and potentially lead to the release of violent offenders who should remain behind bars. Senator Chris West, a Republican from Baltimore County, the bill's sponsor, said the measure was about redemption, arguing that teenagers convicted as adults eventually deserve the right to prove to a judge that they have turned their lives around. Hogan allowed 2 other police accountability bills to become law without his signature. One puts in place a process to return the Baltimore Police Department to local control for the first time since 1860. The other, which takes effect in October, shifts the investigation of police-involved fatalities from local authorities to an independent unit in the State Attorney General's office. It also bans police departments from acquiring surplus military equipment.
We are on the right side of history,
said Senator Jill P. Carter, a Democrat from Baltimore City, who sponsored one of the measures Hogan vetoed and had previously spent a decade pushing for police accountability and transparency laws to no avail. The legislature, which is slated to finish its 90-day session on Monday, began overturning Governor Hogan's vetoes late Friday night, less than 2 hours after receiving word of the governor's decisions. In casting the first of those override votes, Delegate Vanessa E. Atterbury, a Democrat from Howard, who led a House police restructuring work group over the summer, said the measures were not
anti-police legislation. This is equality and fairness legislation. This was painstakingly put together for black and brown folks in our state,
Atterbury said on the House floor, reciting the names of more than half a dozen Maryland residents who were killed in interactions with police.
It's time for police officers who do not follow the proper law to pay the consequences.
On Saturday, Delegate David Moon, a Democrat from Montgomery, cited the fatal shooting of 2 men in Tacoma Park, Maryland on Wednesday by an off-duty Pentagon police officer who was arrested and charged with murder.
They were shot in the back,
Moon said of the victims, adding that the incident in his suburban district reflects a culture of violence in policing that must be stopped.
Guess what color they were? They were black. You cannot tell me that we do not need this legislation. Literally, as we were debating this happened. It is unacceptable, this culture of violence.
Advocates praised the legislature for the measures that provides greater access to police misconduct records, but several gave tepid support to Jones's bill that replaces the Police Bill of Rights because it does not give civilians absolute control of the disciplinary process.
Having repealed it is a net positive, but for there not to be substantive community oversight makes the passage of it disappointing,
said Davon Love, the director of public policy for a Baltimore-based think tank promoting black empowerment. The Transparency Bill, which takes effect in October, is named for Anton Black, the 19-year-old college student who died in 2018 after being restrained by an officer in a small police department on Maryland's Eastern Shore. Black's family spent months trying to get information about his death and has filed a wrongful death lawsuit. No police officers were charged with wrongdoing. Delegate Gabriel Acevedo, a Democrat from Montgomery, who had sponsored legislation in Black's memory for the last 3 sessions, said on the floor Saturday that,
if we do not have transparency, there can be no accountability, there can be no justice, there can be no community trust.
Clyde Boatwright, the president of the state's Fraternal Order of Police, thanked Hogan in a statement Saturday for
standing with the men and women of law enforcement.
In an interview, he said his members are most concerned about the new use of force standard, which says a police officer may not use force against a person unless,
under the totality of the circumstances, the force is necessary and proportional.
Republican critics of the standards have called it too vague and said courts will have to decide what the language means. Under the statute, an officer who uses excessive force faces criminal penalties up to 10 years in prison. The bill, which also mandates the use of police body cams across the state, takes effect in stages. The training and use of force limits begin in July of 2022, while body cameras are required by different deadlines for different jurisdictions and statewide by July 2025. House Minority Leader Nicholas R. Kipke, a Republican from Anne Arundel, said he supports police revision but believes the use of force standard
goes too far,
and because of the possibility of jail time could prompt police officers to
step back and stand down in situations where a reasonable person would want them to act.
Boatwright said the repeal and replacement of the Bill of Rights still allow officers to have due process, which is what the union sought. The new disciplinary process takes effect July 1st, 2022. Some protections that were in the Bill of Rights, such as a 5-day waiting period before officers accused of wrongdoing must speak to investigators for internal investigations, and the scrubbing of police complaints after a certain period of time are not included in the replacement statute. But officers are still guaranteed the right to participate in political activities and work second jobs. The new disciplinary process for officers requires local jurisdictions to create administrative charging committees made up of civilians. Those committees recommend whether an officer should be internally disciplined and what discipline should be applied. A police chief cannot impose lesser discipline than what the committee recommends. Honestly, I'm pretty curious to see where this is all going to go. I do believe that cops should have union rights. I mean, they do perform an important job after all, but we as a society, or at least we in America, have, in the name of being tough on crime, given the state broad policing powers. It's kind of ironic. We talk about how much we hate so-called big government while giving the state more and more authority to detain, surveil, and police people. I'm going to embrace my inner armchair psychologist and start spouting psychobabble right now, but don't worry, since I'm Facts 5'em, anything I say must be absolute fact because it's in the name. Okay, jokes aside, I do wonder, but are Americans secretly afraid of appearing weak and feminine? Like, seriously, there's this weird, disparagement or taboo, no, maybe not taboo, but against femininity for some reason. Like, it's not absolute or anything, but let's be real here. Men who act feminine are often bullied or vilified, while many women will act feminine, they can act feminine, but at the same time, how do I word this? Like, there's far more of an emphasis on girls who, aren't like other girls, and there's not really as much of an emphasis on boys who aren't like other boys, I mean, if that makes any sense. Trad types, they're like, oh, where are all the trad women? And I'm thinking, you chased them out by vilifying femininity. Personally, I don't give a hoot or a holler if you're masculine or feminine or whatever. Those words don't really mean much to me anyway, but they clearly mean a lot to a lot of other folks, and I'm stuck with them. So, think about it, we in America are quick to call welfare and aid big government, and we see that shit as girly, as weak, feminine, and whatnot. And yet we don't call more and more state authority to surveil and detain and penalize and punish big government. And we see that shit as strong, manly, daddy government. Am I looking too much into this? Possibly. I was originally going to say probably, but then I remember how many people never seem to grow up past the part of their childhood where you play ball like a girl was the worst insult you could be given. Thank you for making it this far. Please smash that motherfucking like button, subscribe, and leave any comments so I can get some of that sweet dopamine from the internet. Share it around too. If I get enough subs, I can finally change my YouTube URL name. It's long and ugly. I don't like it, and I need enough subs to change it. Then again, you don't have to do any of this. I'm not your boss. I'm just Facts 5'em. And right now, I'm signing off.